All good things must come to an end, unfortunately, and it's a lesson I learned pretty early in life. After 4 amazing issues of Wolverine, the first ever Marvel Comics officially released in South Africa, my world was turned upside down and I walked into one of the biggest comic book events of the 90s, the Age of Apocalypse. In it, Professor X's son goes back in time to take care of Magneto, and as a result unleashes hell on Earth. In this episode we will explore this major reboot of the X-Men universe as Marvel teaches us that no good deeds ever go unpunished. Let's go. Hi guys, and welcome to HTP Storytime, and today we continue our exploration of the officially released Marvel Comics in South Africa. The last few episodes we spoke about the Wolverine books that Meteor Press published in South Africa, but they also ran an X-Men series concurrently. While the Wolverine series was running, this 4-part X-Men storyline was playing out called Legion Quest. The story arc was the setup for a massive comic book event that literally turns the whole X-Men universe on its head. The event was called the Age of Apocalypse. This one-off crossover storyline redesigned every single X-Men character and changed many of their motivations or fundamental characteristics. This story takes place in an alternative timeline, a horrendous future where the ancient mutant apocalypse rules over literally a post-apocalyptic world. Unfortunately, with this 4-part story arc, I could never find the first issue again after its first release. It would have been Uncanny X-Men issue 320 in America. I just wasn't interested when the book came out because just flipping through it as a kid there was no action. All I could see was a love story between Archangel and Psylocke. I was too young to care back then, and to be honest, I still don't really care. So I missed out, but I did get issue 2, 3 and 4 over time, and a good few months after they were released, so I was pretty lucky to find them at all, as Meteor Press never reprinted anything after they went out of business. There's no ads watch with this episode, unfortunately, as we have covered all the ads in these books already in the previous 4 Wolverine episodes, so let's dive straight into the abridged Legion Quest story arc. The founder of the X-Men, Professor Charles Xavier, had a son called Legion. He has some mental and emotional problems, and he decides to go back in time to kill the supervillain Magneto. In doing so, he's hoping to make the world a better place for humans and mutants, as Magneto at this point in the X-Men storyline was basically just a mutant terrorist. So Marvel is attempting to answer that age-old question: what would happen if we go back in time to kill Hitler? The Legion character recently had his own FX series called Legion, if you want to see more of him and his great ideas. So Legion travels to the past, to Israel in the 1960s, to find his dad and Eric Lensher, aka the future supervillain Magneto. We also learn that Charles and Eric have basically become best friends from the day they met. The two have yet to fully discover their powers, and both have yet to experience the defining moments in their life that would make them become either heroes or villains. They are young and idealistic still. We have a memorable scene where the two get into a bar fight, protecting a man from a drunken asshole. But Legion, due to the time travel, unfortunately develops a spot of amnesia, and everyone thinks he's just a crazy homeless guy or something. Well, until he sets himself on fire with his mutant powers. Then they get a bit worried. Meanwhile, a few X-Men have followed Legion back in time to try and stop him from achieving his misguided goals. Well, I mean, we don't know yet if it's misguided. It might be a good idea to kill Magneto, just like it might be a good idea to kill Hitler. Unfortunately, as soon as the X-Men get transported to the past, everyone comes down with a case of amnesia. When Legion finally regains his memories, he attempts to kill Magneto, who's saved by his friend Charles, leaping in front of the killing blow. Today, all his perceptions of reality were ripped away, and he saw a glimpse of what his life might have been. 4 noble men and a woman, mutants like him, who in his name were willing to risk their all to save a man who would become their enemy, and one desperate madman, willing, almost eager, to kill in that name, his friend. Charles Francis Xavier could not allow that, and in one desperate move, his future, his life, are sacrificed. For there was never a choice. Before he kills him, he says, "Goodbye, Eric Magnus Lenscher. I hope that in death, you'll find the peace you've been missing in life. Sayonara." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the whoopsie face. The "I just killed my papa and broke the timeline" face. With no Charles Xavier, Legion was never born. The X-Men were never created. They blink out of existence instantly. Bishop, who came with the X-Men, is somehow spared because he's already from another timeline, so he gets left behind. Unfortunately, he's struck with even more amnesia than he had before. Now, since the X-Men never formed, they never stopped the ancient mutant Apocalypse from taking over the world when he first attempted it. Apocalypse is one of the X-Men's most formidable foes with seemingly endless powers, and if anyone could literally take over the world, it was him. Without the X-Men there to stop him, Apocalypse soon takes power, and he and his 4 horsemen immediately start exterminating every human in North America. Apocalypse believes mutants are the superior race, and he removes everything he terms as weak, i.e. all humans. He murders the human population en masse in what he calls cullings. And even though Apocalypse believes mutants are the superior race, he also starts hunting down all mutants with either telepathic powers or time-altering abilities, just to ensure that there will never be any challenge to his rule. I mean, this dude's hardcore. He's literally playing 4D chess over here. There are pockets of humans still around, some even working with Apocalypse, but the majority of humanity is now concentrated in Europe. Here the Human High Council resides, protecting themselves with an army of Sentinels. Sentinels being the giant robots humans have constructed to resist mutant powers. During this Age of Apocalypse event, all regular X-Men series stopped publishing and were replaced by an Age of Apocalypse version of that comic book. Since this is a completely different timeline, all the characters get redesigned, not just in looks but personality. For example, Beast, a member of the X-Men, is now an evil genetic scientist, and Sabretooth is now a good guy, and he's still getting along great with Gambit, as we can see. Naturally, when this book came out when I was a kid, I knew nothing about these upcoming massive changes. In the last Wolverine comic book, all we saw at the end that hinted at this change was a little blurb that said, "Next issue, Age of Apocalypse." But every comic book had a little teaser like that at the end of what's to come next month, but I never paid much attention to it, as it always promised way more than it delivered. Case in point. The last thing I expected was that everything I'd ever known and loved was about to change. I was so happy with my 4 issues of Wolverine comics that I really wasn't ready for a complete character and world overhaul. So the next month, after the amazing Wolverine issue 4, I get to the newsagent on the release date of what I expected will be Wolverine 5. In the previous issue, Wolverine had just killed Sabretooth, so I was dying to find out what would happen next. What I found instead was this book, Xmen Alpha. The embossed white cover makes quite a statement. This design of the book is to signal the reset of everything we used to know. The X-Men logo at the top is actually the original logo for the comic book, before the change in the 90s to a more modern design. We see Meteor Press using their own futuristic font to print the price down here, which actually fits very well with the whole aesthetic of the design. And as you can see, this book is only 50 cents more than the usual cover price. If you look at the back, you still see the Comic Book Code Authority stamp. For the 50 cents extra, you don't just get an embossed cover, but there are no ads in this book. It's great news for readers and collectors, and I have to take my hat off to Meteor Press. It's bad news, of course, for our Ads Watch segment. The entire Age of Apocalypse story arc is beyond the scope of this series, so we'll just be looking at the storyline featuring Wolverine, or Weapon X as he's now rechristened. This is the name Logan had before he joined the X-Men, so it makes sense that he'd still be using it now, since the X-Men don't exist in the Age of Apocalypse storyline. He just gets a small part in this Xmen Alpha comic book, as this book aims to just be an introduction to this new world. So let's dive in. The tone is set right off the bat here. We open on Bishop, basically just a crazy bum at this point, making his way through a literal post-apocalyptic wasteland. Welcome to Seattle. It should be raining. Certainly the man reaching upwards thinks so, though a sudden downpour might slicken his climb, surely. But surely it would cut the stench. For years he has followed the Infinite's trail of genocide. At the sight of the horrific cullings, a dim recollection stirs within him, a memory of another time. Of a time of what? A feeling. He had a name for it once, but he no longer remembers what it was. And slowly we realize what he is climbing is in fact a mountain of dead bodies, the result of Apocalypse's cullings. The artist for this issue is friend of the people Adam Kubert, who we are now well familiar with Wolverine. How he manages all this art for all these books, I have no freaking idea. Here he does his usual amazing work. We meet the new X-Men, now led by Magneto of all people. It turns out seeing his friend Charles die inspired Magneto to a greater good. He now is trying to realize Charles's dream of humans and mutants living together in peace. I thought this was a pretty good twist. It's amazing that one shocking experience can inspire some people to greatness and others to darkness. The sight of Magneto in pretty much the same costume he has in the real timeline triggers Bishop's memories. All he remembers is Red Man bad, but in this timeline Red Man is actually good. He attacks Magneto and accuses him of causing all the horror we were just introduced to. As we've said, it's pretty hard to find telepaths that haven't been killed by Apocalypse. So, in order to read Bishop's mind to find out what he's talking about, the X-Men set up some kind of mind meld circuit between Rogue, Magneto and Bishop, just to find out what he is on about. Pretty dangerous considering Bishop is from all appearances just a random crazy homeless guy. And here these people are risking their lives, but okay. Magneto learns through Bishop's memories that their reality is wrong. Charles Xavier never should have died, and as a direct result of his death, Apocalypse was able to take over the world. Magneto from this point on dedicates himself to restoring the true reality, since it would mean the horror they live in will never happen. But he also chooses not to reveal what he saw in Bishop's mind to the rest of the X-Men. To restore the true timeline means Magneto will need to give up the family he started with his wife Rogue in this timeline. She and Magneto are married and they have a child together that Magneto named Charles. So Magneto also knows that in the true timeline, he's basically Apocalypse. The guy saying mutants are the superior race, etc., etc. So stopping Apocalypse and restoring the real timeline is a massive sacrifice for this man to make. He will attempt a near impossible feat to save the world, and if he succeeds, he will lose his family and his very identity. But on to Wolverine, or Weapon X as he's known. In this reality, he's still a good guy, but he's one-handed. He lost his other hand fighting his former partner from the X-Men, Cyclops. In this reality, Cyclops is a bit of a bad guy. Not all the way evil, but not all the way good. In return for taking his hand, Wolverine took Cyclops' eye, making him more in sync with his namesake. At the time that this happened, Wolverine was rescuing Jean Grey from one of Apocalypse's breeding pens. The two fell in love and they are now dating. We find the couple currently in London. The UK is the base of operations for the Human High Council, the last human government still standing. They govern over Europe, where the majority of remaining humans now find themselves. The hands of time have stopped inside Big Ben. The Human High Council will do anything to turn back those hands and regain control. Even give benefit of the doubt to those Homo superiors who claim to fight against Apocalypse. Homo superiors being what they refer to mutants as. Hello Moira, been a long time. Not long enough, Logan. Jean meet Moira Trask. She and her husband Bolivar make up the spiteful two of the council. Charming as ever, I see. You brought the data rods from Sinister? We learn in a twist that one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen, Mr. Sinister, is betraying him. He has sent some encrypted data disks to the Human High Council, using Wolverine and Jean Grey as couriers. What data, we don't know, and unfortunately, that's the entire story we get in this comic for the newly christened Weapon X. The rest of the book is setting up the rest of the X-Men Age of Apocalypse comics, and introducing us to the rest of the cast of characters. It was only the next month that I finally got my hands on a full Weapon X comic book. To me back then, this was a pretty weak introduction to a brand new Wolverine after they took away my classic Wolverine. Fortunately, I would get more convinced with the next few issues of Weapon X, and we will have a look at issue 1 next week.